Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton here in the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. Wildly excited about our 3:30 guest. The cutting edge of what's new and what's old all coming together with Jim Hansen, professor down at Auburn, but gonna be best known around the world for the author of First Man, the book. The autobiography of Neil Armstrong, the first man to walk on the moon. Jim, a little bit about this, I was thinking about it, is when you were writing this, it's a really remarkable story about how you got the opportunity to write this book. He had stiff-armed, he had Heisman Trophied Stephen Ambrose, he had Heisman Trophy Jim Michener, and here you are, this academic down at Auburn, and you just threw, what was the secret to getting Neil Armstrong to agree to write the autobiography?
Well, I could write a book about getting to write the book because it took about 2 years. As fast as Neil was in making decisions in the cockpit, he was unbelievably deliberate about almost every other decision in life. I was about 20 years into my career writing, and I'd written several books and articles about aerospace history, but I had decided I'd like to write about, like to do a biography about an astronaut, and Armstrong by far was the one that interested me the most. No one had ever written about him. I knew his reputation of being a very private man. So I wrote him. I'm not sure if it was a stiff arm, but it was certainly a push. It was a polite no. And then I sent him a few of my books to look at, and that kind of opened the door a bit. And I think the fact that he knew I would take his technical side seriously, because first and foremost, he was an engineer. And I'm not an engineer, but I had written a lot about the history of engineering. And I think he knew that I would take his technical side seriously. And then I just caught him at the right time. I think his family members had been encouraging him to get this done. He was close to retiring from a number of corporate board positions. So things just sort of piled up on him, to continue with the football metaphor.
And his first rejection was, "I'm too busy," is that correct?
Well, it was partly that, yeah, and it was partly that he told me that a number of writers had tried, to contact him before. He said he just wasn't quite ready yet. So I think it was just not being ready yet, emotionally and mentally ready to go into this in such detail. He knew it was going to take a lot of time, and wasn't sure how much time I would need. One thing that's interesting, I looked at my contract with Neil from 2002 or 1, just a few days ago, and he originally in the contract only agreed to 15 hours of interviews, which was a lot for Armstrong, but I ended up having 55 hours of tape recorded interview, and I had forgotten totally that we had agreed to do only 15 hours.
Right, one of the most important men in history, and you get him for over and out, 15 hours. It must have been incredibly difficult, knowing how difficult, I don't want to say he was a recluse, but he was a recluse relative to exposing his life as doing the autobiography. Was it a little bit like approaching J.D. Salinger up in Vermont or something? I mean, was there sort of that aura of secrecy and reclusiveness?
Salinger was next on my list. If I hadn't gotten Armstrong, I was going to move down to Salinger, and then maybe to Harper Lee after that. Since she's from Alabama, God bless her soul. Well, yeah. I mean, the one thing that what really intrigued me about Armstrong, and I think panned out to be very intriguing, is that I knew that it wasn't just going to be a biography, that it was going to be an iconography.
Yeah.
Because Armstrong became this global icon, and society and culture projected so many meanings onto him, so many stories. And one of the things that I learned very early in my research is that every story had to be really closely fact-checked, because people were making stuff up left and right. They wanted to be part of his story. Even people that had gone to school with him or had worked with him, they were telling tall tales just because they wanted to be close to Neil. And so if I had not actually had access to Neil, where I could check out the accuracy, the reality of some of these stories, other authors, you wouldn't have known, because Neil he didn't go around, clarifying this all by himself. I had to ask him specifically about specific people and specific stories, and then he would tell me whether they were true or not. But he wasn't like telling, he wasn't going through that list all on his own.
So the book's won critical acclaim, and it's won it in a unique way, both from a research standpoint as being a great historian, but also from a storytelling standpoint. Was that the real difficult transition you had to make, in that here's this engineer trained in test pilot, Purdue educated, and you need to take his science and engineering and translate it into something that folks want to read, and then ultimately that can be made into a movie. How did that work?
Well, yeah, I mean, to find the narrative, to be able to weave the personal story with the professional story, and to show the relationships between the two, that was one of my goals in the book. And when you're talking about technical things, I know I wanted readers that were, I knew they weren't going to be mostly engineers, so I had to explain and take them along through the technology and explain it in a way that would be understandable to everyone. But again, to always put it on the backbone of the narrative. And so that was really the challenge in the writing. And I think the movie that's coming out soon does a really great job of combining the personal and the professional. It's not just, you're not just going to the moon as a country or as NASA. You're taking a journey that Neil took personally, that his family took, that his wife and children took, and that's a story that really was not very well known until the book, and now the movie is going to really show a lot of elements that probably people missed even in the book.
So, when you were writing it, was there this added complexity of, were you writing it for Neil Armstrong, or were you writing it for the reader? Because, you have this unique relationship with one of the globe's most historic people. He's only entrusted you. There's so much of an added burden, and you so don't want to disappoint him. I mean, the last thing you want to do is finish this book, and he goes, terrible, right?
Yeah.
How did you handle that?
Well, it's a very good question, and maybe this sounds kind of selfish on my part, but I mean, I obviously didn't want to disappoint Neil. I didn't want to betray the trust that he gave it to me, but at the same time, the responsibility I felt was not just to him, but to the historical record.
Right.
I mean, he had agreed with me. He had agreed to do something that I knew he was never going to agree to do again. This was going to be a one-time opportunity to get the historical record as straight and as interpreted as possible. So I felt the most responsibility to my granddaughter and my grandchildren and your grandchildren to make the story that if people read it 200 or 500 years from now, that they'll have the essence of everything that's significant about it. In the end, I mean, I wanted Neil to read the manuscript. He did. He helped me keep things technically accurate, and he gave me just one compliment when the book was over. He told me, "Jim, you wrote exactly the book you told me you were going to write." So that was, but that doesn't mean there were issues that were going to be rather challenging, I think, even for him. I didn't try to become his friend while I was writing the book, because I knew there could be some things that he might not want me to bring up, and a friend might not bring up.
Right.
But so I retained my independence and my scholarly approach through the end of the book and its publication. Then we kind of became friends afterward. We stayed in touch after the book was published in 2005.
Well, I think the phrase you should use is, it's one small book for Neil, one giant biography for readers. Okay,
it is one giant biography. That's true. And like I said, I mean, I think I did want to write a book that reflected who Neil was. And if you left out those details, then you're losing some element of Armstrong that was very important. Plus, again, the reader 500 years from now, if we had a chronicler of Columbus who was with Columbus on all of his voyages and knew Columbus's story, what detail from that chronicler would we say, okay, it's okay to leave that out? We don't know. I mean, so if I found something interesting, illuminating, and significant in some respect, I'm finding a way to get it into the book.
Did Neil Armstrong drink a lot of beer? Oh, no, wait, that's somebody else's biography. For you, you finish this book, he gives you a compliment, but it goes beyond that. And then since the completion of this book, you're on a stage. Walter Cronkite gives you a glowing recommendation. I mean, that's about as good as you can get when you're writing a history book. And then you get caught up in this movie, and it's a long time in development. You're now a co-producer of it. It was originally going to be Clint Eastwood, is that right?
That's right. Even before the book, I even got a good start on the book. Warner Brothers came to my agent, and of course, Clint made all of his movies, or I think virtually all of them, with Warner Brothers. So Clint invited Neil and me and our wives out to his private golf course in California, and we met. But I still had a couple more years to work on the book. And when the book came out, I don't know, Neil and Clint, different chemistry there, different vibe. I mean, and I think Clint was literally more interested in space cowboys. He made a movie by that name. Neil was not a space cowboy. He was a introspective, very cerebral, engineer, test pilot, astronaut.
Right.
And I don't think Clint in the end saw that as it's a very difficult story to tell. How do you take a personality like Armstrong and turn that into dramatic cinema? Well, the answer is give it to Damien Chazelle.
Yeah, right.
And Damien Chazelle will find the way to do it.
Who's a Providence guy, just for the record, from Providence, Rhode Island, for growing up here. Talk a little bit about now, you're co-producing it. Spielberg's involved with this movie. Ryan Gosling's the lead actor in it. It's getting rave reviews. You mentioned prior to going live that you've got showings, premieres of it on campus at Auburn for students. And how many have signed up to see it?
We had 1,000 sign up, and we had only planned for one screening. And so, to stop a riot from happening, the theater has agreed to put it on other screens, so we can accommodate everyone.
That's great. What's it like for you? Professor down at Auburn, and all of a sudden it's Clint Eastwood, it's Steven Spielberg, it's Ryan Gosling. What's that all about?
Well, it's forced my retirement from Auburn because there's no way to be a full-time professor and do these extra things. So I retired at the end of spring semester 2017 in order to be available for the shoot and everything. So yeah, it's like a second career for me, and I haven't really planned on having a second career. Certainly and it's just not the movie, because we have the Apollo 11 50th anniversary coming up next summer. And, I'm going to be very busy with talks and events, at least through July of 2019. I think at that point, I'm really going to try to find what true retirement means.
So which is better, Hollywood private parties or grading midterms?
Well, I've done a lot more grading of midterms than I have Hollywood parties. I need to go to more Hollywood parties to really be able to judge that fairly.
So, you're in a whirlwind situation, wildly exciting. What what's your next project? What are you thinking about? What do you want to sort of tackle next as a writer?
Well, this will be partly writing, but unfortunately, maybe the showbiz bug or Hollywood has gotten to me. But I have a friend in Houston, Robert Perlman, who's one of the world's leading experts on space collectibles.
Yeah.
And we have pitched a TV reality show called Moonrock Hunters. There are a lot of moonrocks that came back to Earth that were then sent out to the different states of the United States and to different countries under different programs. And now those moonrocks are missing.
Oh, really?
They're gone. They've been stolen. They've been misplaced. And what we're going to do, episode by episode, is go hunt down the missing moonrocks.
That's a great idea. Yeah.
And our goal is to recover as many of these as possible, although there are certain stories, like the case of the state of New Jersey, which has lost its moonrock, that the rumor is that the mob has it. So I'm not sure how we're going to handle that in our reality TV series. I'm not sure we'll go after that particular lost moonrock.
If you find those lost moonrocks, you may also find Jimmy Hoffa's body accordingly.
They're all down there together, right? Yeah.
And then You know, from a standpoint of your career and sort of the explosion of it, did you ever really think this is what the career mode would be, that this is kind of the trajectory that you'd realize? And how have you absorbed it coming from an academic background?
Well, I'm not sure I have absorbed it. It's just sort of hitting me and slapping me around, and I'm trying to stand up to it as best as I can. In terms of career development, I mean, I've shared this idea with my students when I was director of the Honors College here. I'm a big believer in chaos
Yeah.
theory. I mean, I think things happen, that are mostly accident and serendipity, and the best thing you can do is get yourself well educated, well trained, so you can adapt to changing circumstances, because you never know what opportunities are going to come your way. I never for the imagined that any of this would happen to me, and if it had happened earlier in my career, I probably wouldn't have been able to handle it very well. And so I think, again, just sort of be ready to adapt and take advantage of things. But I certainly never expected a book would turn into this giant movie that it has. And now the book is also being published. By the end of this month, it will be in 21 different foreign languages, which to me is maybe the most exciting thing.
That's great. Last thing, you pursued a goal. You had this idea. You went after an incredible challenge, trying to get Neil Armstrong to do a book with you. You, I think, had awareness that other major writers had failed at it. He was a little bit of the holy grail. What would you say to people who have that dream, have that goal, and are frustrated by their inability to accomplish it? Whether it's writing a book or creating an art gallery or whatever they might be trying to do in life, what's your life lesson to them?
Well, it's to persist. It's to use all of your creative problem-solving abilities and your social skills. I mean, I think a lot of it had to do with Neil. If when I met Neil, when he invited me to his home to meet him, if I had, there had to be some. I had to be able to socialize with him in a certain kind of way, or it would never have worked. I think the fact that I had come from an academic background and that I had a lot of experience talking to engineers, and I grew up only 50 miles from where Neil grew up in Ohio. I grew up in northeastern Indiana, so I think that was part of it. But I think you've got to take your strengths, recognize your weaknesses, be persistent, be very creative in thinking about your own career, be honest, because if you're not honest about yourself, you can't be, and if you're not honest with other people, it's never going to work out very well. So, I mean, I think that's, I have 4 grandchildren, and that would be my basic message to them. You've got to be honest to yourself and with other people, and then, you can really then take off with your abilities.
I lied. That wasn't the last question. This is the last question. Now, with the success as a writer and now as a success as a movie maker, are you the academic Bo Jackson of Auburn?
Well, if somehow I can get my hands on an Oscar, like he got his hands on a Heisman Trophy, but as
then
my
we're
understanding,
talking.
only 3 producers per film get the Oscar, and we've had more than 3 producers. And I think as co-producer, I'll be probably maybe get to touch it or something. But and that's a big dream. I mean, there's many fine films coming out this year, but I think we'll be right there in the mix.
Listen, I want to thank you so much for taking all the time today. Congratulations on the remarkable success. This is wildly exciting, I think, for all history buffs, everybody looking to get a perspective. 69 was such a remarkable time. I think we're absorbed that 2018 is so unique. 1969 was an equally remarkable period of time, civil rights, anti-war, and here is this man landing on the moon and changing history for all time. Jim, thanks so much for Skyping in with us. Everybody else, we'll be back at 4 o'clock. Kate Nagel will have Jennifer Lawless from the University of Virginia talking about everything going on down in D.C. and the latest on the Supreme Court nomination process. And then slightly thereafter, Laura Fonso will be on with everything about food. Jim, thanks again. We'll
My
be back.
pleasure.
We'll be back at 4 o'clock.
All right.